All right, here we go. The leader of the Democratic Party.
First, I am proud that this is the first time this year that Leader Pelosi is appearing as Speaker Pelosi in this room. And the longest shutdown in American history will finally end today. The President has agreed to our request to open the government and then debate border security, which is great news for 800,000 federal workers and millions of Americans who depend on government services. As Democrats have said all along, the solution to this impasse was separate funding for the government and then go over our disagreements from border security. Separate the funding of government from the discussion on border security, and that's what we got. And Democrats in the Senate and in the House were united behind this position throughout the shutdown, and ultimately this agreement endorses our position. It reopens the government without preconditions, gives Democrats and Republicans an opportunity to discuss border security without holding hundreds of thousands of American workers hostage. We expect the continuing resolution to clear the Senate and clear the House this afternoon and be signed by the President today. And before I go on, I think on both of us, but we want to thank all the federal workers from the bottom of our hearts. They've worked so selflessly this past month without pay, showing up to do a job they knew was important, but for which they weren't fairly compensated. The workers showed up despite the callous indifference of the administration, who treated them as hostages, who treated them as pawns, who belittled their financial strain. Our dedicated public servants should never, never have to go through this again. We will do everything we can to make sure they won't have to. And this past month has proven just how vital government services are to the American people, whether it's our food safety, our airports, our national parks, our economy, our national security, and so much else. The American people do not like it when you throw a wrench into the lives of government workers over an unrelated political dispute. Working people throughout America empathized with the federal workers and were aghast at what the President was doing to them. Hopefully now the President has learned his lesson. Now, once the President signs the continuing resolution, we in Congress will roll up our sleeves and try to find some agreement on border security. We don't agree on some of the specifics of border security. Democrats are firmly against the wall. But we agree on many things, such as the need for drug inspection technology, humanitarian aid, strengthening security at our ports of entry. And that bodes well for finding an eventual agreement, the fact that we have so many areas where we can agree. But today, the President will sign the bill to reopen the government along the outlines of what we have proposed. And hopefully, it means a lesson learned for the White House and for many of our Republican colleagues. Shutting down the government over a policy difference is self-defeating. It accomplishes nothing but pain and suffering for the country and incurs an enormous political cost to the party shutting it down. We cannot ever hold American workers hostage again. Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader, and thank you for your leadership in bringing us to this important resolution now, where shortly the Senate will send over to the House the paper. I came over to see the original paper, and we'll get it probably in a half an hour. Two resolutions, one to open up government for all of the agencies of government, and one to proceed to conference on the Homeland Security bill. We're pleased that we reached an agreement to reopen government now so that we can have a discussion on how to secure our borders. It is very clear that we all understand the importance of securing our borders, and we have some very good ideas on how to do that, and that will be part of the discussion as we go forward. House Democrats look forward to working in a bipartisan, bicameral way to pass all of the bills to open government as we proceed into the conference discussion. Now I'm an appropriator, and I was forged in that culture, and I know, left to their own devices, that the appropriators bicamerally and bipartisanly can come to conclusion. Again, sometimes it comes to the four principles of the leaders of the House and Senate to weigh in, and I think that we will have a very productive time in a short period of time to come to some conclusion. We're grateful, inspired by the courage and the determination of America's workers. They have shown during this crisis such strong character. But nonetheless, they have to pay the bills when they come due, whether it's a rent check, paying their mortgage, their credit card bills, their car payment, the list goes on. Some of them didn't even have gas money because they didn't have cash or any more line of or credit card ability to put gas in the car to go to work. It's really hard for some in the administration to understand how people live paycheck to paycheck and how marginal some of their existences are. Makes a difference in how they educate their children, how they put food on the table, again, how they pay the rent, etc. So we thank them and are so glad that, as the President said earlier, as soon as possible or immediately. So I don't know which is faster, but the quickest of the two, they will receive their back pay and the pay that is due today. We're grateful to Democrats on both sides of the Capitol for their unity that was very, very important in these discussions. It's sad, though, that it's taken this long to come to an obvious conclusion. We talked about missed bills and financial security being shaken, sometimes questioning, putting in question the credit, how people's credit is viewed. And that's particularly problematic for our veterans, many of whom are in their jobs with security clearances. And a security clearance is affected if your credit rating is diminished. So we are grateful to our veterans who have donned the uniform of our country to protect us and then moved on to the civilian side to continue their public service. And we want them to have all the respect they deserve, as well as our other public employees, federal employees, who are working so hard to meet the needs of the American people. We value their purpose. We appreciate their diligence in performing their jobs, whether, as the leader said, keeping us safe, and in terms of civilian aviation, whether it's the FBI, other areas of public safety, but also just in so many ways, whether it's food safety and the rest. The list goes on. You're familiar with it. But we don't want in any way any shutdown of government to diminish the respect that we have for the purpose of our public employees and the excellence of their service. Disagreement in policy should never be a reason to shut down government, really shouldn't, especially, again, for a period of time that has an impact on the paychecks. I'm sad it has taken this long. I'm glad that we've come to a conclusion today as to how we go forward in the next 3 weeks. And again, I salute the minority, the Democratic leader in the Senate, for the work that he did to bring this. Because in the House we passed 10, but 10 times we passed the bill. Working with our leadership, Mr. Hoyer, 10 times he brought bills to the floor to open up government. And the most recent one that was presented on the Senate floor yesterday was so simple. $12 billion for disaster assistance and open up government for 2 weeks. The Republicans said no. I think the public weighed in. And I quote Lincoln all the time, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. And we thank the public for weighing in so strongly, for paying attention. And I think that will be the success of this conference. Again, as an appropriator, I participated in many conferences when we used to have them. This conference, that the public awareness is so increased and the public interest in it is so sharpened that they will see what the decisions are that we have to make and help weigh in on those decisions. I thank you again.
approval about it.
Okay, wait, one at a time. Come on, one at a time, please.
Wait a minute, are you recognizing Nancy?
The president has wanted this wall funding for a long time, but it wasn't until Democrats won the House that he really went to the mat for it. How much of all of this do you think is about the new power dynamic and his desire to show you who's really in charge?
I don't get your question. I mean, the point is today we have come to a way to go forward to debate the best ways to protect our border. I don't see this as any power play. I see.
I'm referring to the past 36 days and the fact that he held out over wall funding.
Well, if you're saying that the president held out over wall funding to show who was in charge, I think that's quite a bad statement to make about any leader in our country. But what I do say is let's go forward, get this done. The leader mentioned lessons learned and hope that the people know that we cannot hold our public employees hostage because we have a disagreement. For how many, 34 days? Is it now over 1 month? Having an impact on their lives. So I don't want to make any characterizations of the president's motivation. You'll have to ask him.
Go ahead.
Speaker Pelosi, did the president underestimate you politically? And can you assure the public that there won't be another impasse in 3 weeks?
Well, I can't assure the public on anything that the president will do, but I do have to say I'm optimistic. I see every challenge or every crisis as an opportunity to do the right thing for the American people, and at the same time make people aware of what the decisions are that we have here, and hopefully that will make everybody come together in a way that is unifying for our country. I can't characterize the president's evaluation of me.
I just say one more thing in reference to that. I suggested to Leader McConnell that we use a conference committee format. That conference committee has Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, sitting at a table, has worked very successfully on Homeland Security and everything and all the other bills that haven't been signed over the last several years, even when the Republicans were in charge. And so I'm very optimistic that the conference committee can come to a good conclusion and we can avoid another shutdown. Go ahead, Cheryl.
The State of the Union go on as planned now.
The State of the Union is not planned now. I get that. What I'd said to the president is when government is open, we will discuss a mutually agreeable date. And I'll look forward to doing that and welcoming the president to the House of Representatives for the State of the Union when we agree on that mutual agreeable date.
This morning you were planning to announce a border security vision of Democrats, what you want. What is the state of that proposal, the status of it? And also, can you accept any sort of physical barrier in a border security plan?
The work of the conference committee will draw out everyone's view of what is the best way to protect our borders. Our chair of our Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, Congresswoman Lucille Rohrabach-Allard, knows this issue very well. She will go to the table with our best ideas on how to protect our border. The leader referenced some in terms of infrastructure that relates to our ports of entry. The president talks about drugs coming into our country. 90% of the drugs come through the ports of entry. They'll come one way or another, as he was describing, they come through our ports of entry. So let us increase the infrastructure where the drugs are coming in. Let us increase, as the leader said, the technology to scan for that, for drugs, guns, other contraband, and the rest. Let us talk about some of the things we have in common.
All right, so you've been listening to, now we heard from the president last hour, now the reaction from the leaders of the Democratic Party, both in the House and the Senate. You know, Speaker Pelosi is saying she is optimistic. They've got now 3 weeks. This is what they wanted. They wanted the government to be reopened, and therefore they would negotiate and hopefully find an agreement on border security. So let's start there. Michael Smerconish, Gloria Borger are both with me for this conversation. And Michael Smerconish, is starting with you. What did you make of, especially off the top, Leader Schumer's tone. He was the one who said, "We hope Trump has learned his lesson." Could this be perceived as a bit of a victory lap for Democrats, and how might that sit with the president?
Victory lap is exactly what I wrote in my notes. His opening words were to say he agreed to our request. I think he didn't go too far. I didn't think he pressed the point as hard as he could have, that in the end, the government is reopening and the president really doesn't have anything tangible to show for that. So I think the challenge for the two of them was to make clear to their supporters that they had come out on top, but not to offend the president in a way that would dissuade him from sitting down in 3 weeks and trying to bang out a long-term agreement.
Gloria, what did you think of the two of them?
Yeah, I think I agree with Michael. I think they went out of their way not to gloat here. We've all been saying the president caved. He didn't get anything out of this that he couldn't have gotten 3 weeks ago, and we know that to be the case. We know what the Democrats have proposed over and over again, which is, no funding for the wall, reopen the government, then negotiate. And that is exactly what occurred. Nancy Pelosi, when asked about whether the president didn't know what he was dealing with in dealing with her, she refused to characterize how he reacts to her. But it was clear that both of them had decided in advance, we're not going to gloat over this because this isn't over yet. We still have a ways to go, and we want to act positively and productively so we can get something going. Now, Senate Republicans are quite upset about the way this is all played out because, after all, they're the ones who voted on an original proposal that the president pulled out from under them. But right now, the Democrats are feeling pretty good, but they don't want to show it too much.
Michael, I have to ask you about Roger Stone. This is what I wanted to have this conversation with you. You're the one who, most recently interviewed Roger Stone here on your show on CNN. He was talking to you about that he presumed he would be indicted, perhaps. He just wasn't entirely sure when. And voila, you have this morning in Fort Lauderdale. And when you saw him, right here's the video for outside the courthouse, after he posted bond, he sure seems to be enjoying his indictment today.
Welcome to the worst and best day in Roger Stone's life. He relishes this fight. He loves this. I said this morning on New Day, the only thing worse for Roger than being indicted is not being indicted. This is the matchup that he has relished and wanted and has taunted the special prosecutor to bring. His defense. He said it to me on November 3rd that if he's guilty of anything, he's guilty of punking and hyping and posturing and promoting and bluffing. The question I have, having read the indictment, is it's one thing to say those things in the public realm, but when you take an oath and go behind closed doors before a congressional committee, why take on the government in a way that can clearly be contradicted with texts and with emails? And he'll have to explain that.
I look forward to hearing so much more of that over the weekend. Michael Smerconish, thank you very much. Gloria, thank you. Sure. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thanks for being with me. Our special coverage continues in just a moment.
Mary.
Poppins, you came back.
You seem hardly to have aged at all.
Really? One never discusses a woman's age, Michael. Would have hoped I taught you better.
That is Emily Blunt in Mary Poppins Returns. It is one of the two films that landed her nominations at this Sunday's Screen Actors Guild Awards. Emma Stone and Amy Adams also receiving 2 nominations each. Adams as a supporting actress playing Lynn Cheney in the highly acclaimed political drama Vice. And A Star is Born has the most nominations of any movie with 4. You can catch all the winners Sunday at 8 Eastern on both TBS and TNT. Oh gosh, I just watched that Sunday and had the ugly cry. I can't hear that music yet. I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thank you so much for being with me. The Lead with Jake Tapper starts right now.
"35 days of a government shutdown with absolutely nothing achieved except a whole lot of pain inflicted on the American people." The Lead starts right now. Breaking news. President Trump announces that the longest shutdown in this nation's history is over. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, were paid nothing because of it. And it looks like that's exactly what President Trump got out of this for now. Nothing. More huge breaking news. A major moment in the Russia probe. Longtime Trump ally Roger Stone dragged out of his house and into a courtroom today, and the indictment reads literally like a mob movie. He cut his teeth during Watergate, has an image of Richard Nixon tattooed on his back, and was once fired for having swinger fever. Can Roger Stone convince Robert Mueller that he is not a crook? We're taking a deeper dive into Stone's long and sleazy career.
This is CNN.
Deal to reopen the federal government after a 35-day shutdown, the longest in U.S. history. President Trump now says, hey, he's okay with a short-term deal, one that includes exactly $0.0 for his border wall, the reason for the shutdown. $0.0, which coincidentally is exactly equal to the last two paychecks for 800,000 federal workers, proving the government has been shut down now for 35 days for absolutely no reason. President Trump upended the process of funding the government to demand something that he never got. He inflicted pain on more than 1 million Americans for no reason, no result. Adding insult to injury, moments ago, Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, scolded President Trump for this long, unnecessary battle.
Hopefully now the president has learned his lesson. We cannot ever hold American workers hostage again.
CNN's Caitlin Collins joins me now live from the White House. Caitlin, this new government funding bill, it's only for 3 weeks. What happens, bear with me now, what happens if at the end of this 3-week period, the president still is not going to see any border wall money?
Well, Jake, according to what he told reporters in the Rose Garden today, either the government will shut down or he'll invoke a national emergency to bypass Congress to then fund and build his border wall. Now, today he faced the political reality that Democrats do not want to pay for the president's border wall, and now he's facing down the question of what he'll do in 3 weeks if they still haven't changed their minds.
I am very proud to announce today that we have reached a deal to end the shutdown and reopen the federal government.
President Trump backing off his 35-day standoff with Democrats today, announcing a deal to reopen the government temporarily.
In a short while, I will sign a bill to open our government for 3 weeks until February 15th.
The president's endorsement in the Rose Garden paving the way for Congress to pass spending bills that would reopen the government for 3 weeks. But the deal is seen as a cave to Democrats, who the president has failed to force to pay for his border wall once again.
I am asking Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to put this proposal on the floor immediately.
Trump implying if he can't come to an agreement with Democrats in the next 3 weeks, he'll invoke a national emergency and bypass Congress.
If we don't get a fair deal from Congress, the government will either shut down on February 15th again, or I will use the powers afforded to me under the laws and the Constitution of the United States to address this emergency.
The short-term spending bill only includes $1.3 billion for border security and no new funding for the wall, making it a remarkable come down for a president who declared for weeks he wouldn't waver, but today framed it as a win.
This is an opportunity for all parties to work together for the benefit of our whole beautiful, wonderful nation.
The presidential announcement coming after a White House official said air travel delays that rippled across the nation Friday played a major role in his decision, telling CNN this is getting worse and worse. He knows this has to end. And after members of the president's inner circle faced backlash for downplaying the financial hardship of the shutdown, Trump making a point to thank them today.
Many of you have suffered far greater than anyone but your families would know or understand.
Now, Jake, the longest government shutdown in history hasn't yielded anything for the president. He didn't get any money for his border wall. He's frustrated Republicans. He didn't do his base any favors by caving to the Democrats' demands today, and he even took a hit in the polls. Now, there are two things to watch over the next few days. That's whether or not the president tries to move forward with that initially scheduled State of the Union address on Tuesday, and two, how he responds to the overwhelmingly negative response from people who are in his conservative, hardline immigration base. Jake.
All right, Caitlin Collins at the White House, thanks so much. Well, let's chat about this. Bill, I'll start with you. Did the president cave?
Sure, and he had to because he was losing support from Republican senators. McConnell held enough senators to prevent the Democratic bill from passing yesterday, but the Democrats got more votes than the Republicans, which doesn't usually happen in a 57-43 Republican Senate. And I think they had their regular lunch, or maybe it's not so regular on Thursday. Of all the senators, it went 2 hours instead of the normal 1 or 2.5 hours, I think, perhaps, with real expressions of discontent and sort of this, I can't hold this anymore, not from Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, but from Senator Bozeman of Arkansas and all kinds of loyalists in the Republican conference who were getting phone calls from their state, from the workers, but also from businessmen, from agricultural interests, saying, this is crazy, this cannot go on. So Trump caved to reality. He only got this 3-week extension, which means that in 3 weeks, what happens in 3 weeks?
Well, he'll probably, my guess would be he invokes the national emergency.
It's less than not getting anything. Like, he lost a lot here. I mean, you think about it, in the 35 days, he lost $1.6 billion that he would have had if he agreed to the legislation that would have passed before the shutdown.
Oh,
he lost,
for border security.
Right. And he lost a critical amount of leverage. Nancy Pelosi now knows exactly when he's willing, where he'll cave and what his pain points are. And then the other thing is, I think to Bill's point, which he's lost, one of the bigger problems going forward in the next 3 weeks, he may have lost the faith of some of his strongest supporters previously up on Capitol Hill. And that doesn't give him any sort of, additional leverage going forward.
And Senator Turner, let me point to this, perhaps not coincidentally, this morning we saw some even more dire response. Obviously, for the 800,000 employees and the contractors, it's been awful. But this morning, we saw mass flight delays. There was a stoppage at LaGuardia. The FBI director released a video slamming the shutdown. The Trump-appointed FBI director, at least 14,000 IRS workers just didn't go to work.
That's right.
And then it was the second day without a paycheck, the second paycheck period. A full month of no pay, the second paycheck period for the 800,000 federal employees.
This is a hot mess. The president's a hot mess. This is a hot mess. And more importantly about which side won in terms of just the pure politics. Over 800,000 people, and that's not even counting the contract workers, have suffered through this for a president who got absolutely nothing. He brung the pain to all of these people, and he got nothing in return for this, and all they got is grief. And then also, we know, as big as the bureaucracy is, they're not going to recover from this tomorrow.
Right.
If the president had any pride about himself, he would make sure that all of the people who are required to be there to process checks were there right now through the weekend, whatever it took to make sure that these workers got their money. But he really doesn't care. And that was shown by him. It was shown by people who work in his administration. Even his family members weighed in on this. I think his daughter-in-law said, it's okay. This is bigger than one person. It's beyond cavalier. It's really sickening that the president would take the people impacted by this directly, and then, to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., what affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Sure. All of America was impacted by this.
No, you can't live in Washington, D.C., which obviously has a lot of federal workers, without hearing from cab drivers, Uber drivers, restaurateurs, food truck owners, how awful things have been for the last months.
That's right.
And Jen, I want to get to a point that Kevin said that you brought up also yesterday, which is flashback a couple months. Nancy Pelosi, people are saying, is she even going to be elected Speaker of the House? There are enough Democrats that are wavering on her. 30-something Democrats said they weren't going to vote for her. Where is Nancy Pelosi now when it comes to the Democratic caucus?
Well, it's really remarkable. I mean, if you look at where we were in November, even after the Democrats won back the House, there was so much uncertainty that we were all talking about here about, could she be elected Speaker? How would she fight off the moderates, et cetera? And now the wall and Trump's insistence on the wall has actually unified the Democratic Party. Pelosi's strength and kind of standing firm on this has unified the Democratic Party and the Democratic caucus at a time where it is very diverse with 40 new members. So that has been a real gift to her. And I would say she's never been more powerful than she is today because of that. And if you look at what has happened over the past couple of days, even Trump supporters, sort of to Kevin's point, are questioning now whether she is actually running the government and not Trump. And that's not what is happening, but that's not a place you want your supporters and former staff to be. He looks weak, and that is something he always fights against.
Now, of course, there is this discussion that's going to go forward now about whether there will be sort of any border wall negotiation or any immigration reform, whatever. I don't know how it's going to happen, but Schumer talked about maybe a conference committee. We'll see. Listen to what President Trump said about what Democrats were telling him privately.
They have said they are for complete border security, and they have finally and fully acknowledged that having barriers, fencing, or walls, or whatever you want to call it, will be an important part of the solution.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Who knows? If I come back to the Republican senators. I mean, this has hurt them in the polls. It's hurt them in the country, as it should have, in my opinion. But I just think when we say Trump insists on this, or Trump is able to, fight back on that, it's because he has had the Republican Senate, now that they've lost the House, behind him. And I think that is now very precarious. McConnell held his people together at some cost to himself, when people wanted to bolt earlier. The senators kept voting loyally or supported McConnell and refusing to bring anything to the floor for 4 weeks.
No, it's incredible.
And then voted yesterday, except for six of them.
Stick around. We're going
to stick with him. So, I mean, the degree to which going forward, he will not have the automatic support of the Senate Majority Leader or Republican senators, I think, can't be overestimated.
Yeah, we'll see. And stick around. We're going to keep talking about this. Did the Democratic leader of the Senate just double dog dare President Trump to declare a national emergency? Then also, there's another little story breaking today. FBI agents arresting President Trump's longtime friend and ally, Roger Stone, in an early morning raid. We have Stone's very clear message to President Trump after his release. Stay with us.
No one should ever underestimate the speaker, as Donald Trump has learned. Democrats stayed totally unified.
That was Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader of the Senate, just moments ago, touting the power of Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and her unified Democratic caucus. I want to go to CNN's Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. And Manu, you were at that news conference. Speaker Pelosi chose her words very carefully, but Schumer was the one saying President Trump needed to learn a lesson. Is it possible, however, that we're in for a repeat of the shutdown in 3 weeks when this new government funding bill runs out?
It's very possible, Jake. In fact, I tried to press the speaker at this press conference whether she'd be more open now to funding for the president's border wall. What was interesting that she did not explicitly say. She sort of sidestepped the question, said that this is going to be up to the discussions of the negotiators going forward. And she said to me, well, haven't I been clear about my position on the wall? And I said, well, what about right now over the next 3 weeks? And she would not say going forward, but still hard to see her coming to where the president wants and a deal that can be reached. That's why most people do expect we may end up in the same position we're on right now, Jake.
And Manu, does this mean that there might be a new invitation for the president to deliver his State of the Union address in the House chamber? And if so, when?
That's a great question. We try to ask her that at this press conference and afterwards, and she would not say explicitly. In fact, the State of the Union, of course, was supposed to take place initially on Tuesday. That has been delayed during the shutdown. And when asked if Tuesday was still a date that the State of the Union would go forward, she said they were going to agree on a, quote, mutually agreeable date after the government is reopened. And so she would not say it would happen Tuesday or when it happened afterwards. Reporters tried to press her about that after this press conference as well. She would not say. So another question going forward, perhaps, Jake, she wants to see the ink dry on the legislation to reopen the government before she goes forward and agrees to invite the president here to the House chamber. Jake.
Yeah, you want to wait for the document to be signed. I think that's fair. Manu Raju, thanks so much. Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. Let's continue our conversation. Senator Turner, take a look at this new poll. New Washington Post, ABC News poll shows whom Americans blame for the shutdown more. 53% say President Trump and Republican legislators. 34% say Speaker Pelosi and Democrats. 10% blame both. Now also take a look at the president's latest job approval number. 37% approval. I'm sorry to laugh, but that's just really low. 57% disapprove. It does seem like there was political pressure really starting to build on President Trump.
No, it was, Jake. And listen, he asked for it and he got it. This is what he wanted. And sometimes you got to be careful what you ask for. He was very glib about, I'll take ownership of the shutdown. It's mine. But the pressures that mounted, especially the human suffering, was more than, not necessarily for him, but more than the members of his Republican Party could stand at a certain point. So this is his shutdown. He owns it. And those polls are a clear reflection of how the American people felt about it. And this is going to be his eternal, failure. And I wanted to make a point about something Bill said about Leader McConnell. He abdicated his responsibility, so did his entire caucus, and they put 800,000 plus people's lives in peril.
Well, while you're speaking of McConnell, take a listen to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell just moments after President Trump's speech.
I've continuously said I wouldn't let the Senate become a theater for show votes and messaging stunts from either side. So I was glad to see today the president's announcement that he and our Democratic colleagues have reached an agreement that will immediately reopen the government.
Now, once again, just to remind people what happened 35 days ago, or a little bit before, the Senate passed a bill, a clean government spending bill, clean, and then President Trump
For the whole year.
For the whole year, and with the understanding that President Trump was going to sign it, and then Senate Republicans had the rug pulled out from under them by President Trump and the White House deciding they weren't going to sign it. But as Bill points out, Republicans were with him lockstep. Was that a mistake by Senate Republicans?
It was, and I think it also, what we don't see is what's happening behind closed doors. And I think behind closed doors, there is a high level of exasperation with the White House and the lack of a strategy here. And that has increased a lot over the last 2 weeks. And I think Bill alluded to this earlier, that, McConnell was pretty much at his wit's end with where the president was going there. I think McConnell was finished with trying to tell the president that this was the wrong approach and decided in the last probably 48 hours, 72 hours to show him that it was the wrong approach by putting these bills on the floors that couldn't get 60 votes. And that increased, a lot of the pressure. And you've seen, I think, the policy luncheon, the weekly policy luncheon that the senators on the Republican side had this week, there was a lot of raised voices. People were blaming Vice President Pence, trying to send the message to the White House about how this was a failed strategy.
I mean, if I were a vulnerable Republican in the Senate, of which there are many, I would be questioning if Mitch McConnell is the right person to be leading my caucus right now. He's up in 2020. I'm not going to say he's that vulnerable. It's Kentucky, but Kentucky loves Donald Trump. He wants to be aligned with Donald Trump. Is he thinking about the entire caucus, or is he thinking about Mitch McConnell? He essentially disappeared for a month. He's the minority leader of the Senate. He's not a powerless actor.
Majority.
I'm sorry, majority.
Your wishes got ahead of reality
he's the
there.
majority leader of the Senate. He's not a powerless actor. And if you're Cory Gardner, if you're Susan Collins, I'd be questioning if he has your interests in mind.
Well, this is why we're not going to be back in 3 weeks where we are today, or where we were 4 weeks ago. Because you now have a Republican conference that is not going to say, okay, let's just go back into another shutdown, and that'll turn out great.
And it was
so I think Trump has no leverage. And I think at best case for Republicans is he just passed what the Senate passed 2 days before the shutdown began. And worst case is they make even more concessions.
All right, everyone stick around because we have another big story today. What Roger Stone's indictment reveals about the Russia investigation and the Trump campaign. That's next. Stay with us.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Welcome back. Sticking with politics, President Trump's longtime confidant and political advisor Roger Stone fighting charges filed by special counsel Robert Mueller today, alleging that Stone obstructed the Russia investigation, tampered with witnesses, and repeatedly lied under oath.
I will plead not guilty to these charges. I will defeat them in court. I believe this is a politically motivated investigation, but I have made it clear I will not testify against the president.
According to the 7-count indictment, Stone sought emails from WikiLeaks that could damage Hillary Clinton's candidacy, and this was done in coordination with Trump campaign officials. A reminder that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, when he was CIA director, referred to WikiLeaks as a, quote, non-state hostile intelligence service, often abetted by state actors like Russia. No surprise, President Trump responded, as he almost always does on Twitter, quote, greatest witch hunt in the history of our country, no collusion. That's in all caps. CNN's Sarah Murray joins me now. Sarah, the indictment says that Roger Stone coordinated with the Trump campaign and tried to get stolen DNC emails from WikiLeaks.
That's right. It takes pains to outline Roger Stone's communications with Trump campaign officials who are not named in this indictment. But it also reveals a pattern of eagerness on behalf of the Trump campaign to try to get their hands on this damaging information that WikiLeaks had and to try to figure out when it was going to be coming out.
Roger Stone reveling today in the post-arrest limelight after his initial appearance before a judge in Florida.
As I have always said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
But only after the pre-dawn raid Stone hoped to avoid. FBI agents swarmed Stone's Fort Lauderdale home, arresting President Trump's longtime political advisor and friend, searching Stone's homes in Florida and New York.
They terrorized my wife, my dogs.
Hours later, Stone vowed to fight the charges against him.
I will plead not guilty to these charges. I will defeat them in court.
The indictment against Stone describes how he coordinated with senior Trump campaign officials to seek out stolen Democratic emails from WikiLeaks that could damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. And then he bragged about his contacts with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
I actually have communicated with Assange.
According to the indictment, Stone spoke to senior Trump campaign officials about WikiLeaks and information it might have had that would be damaging to the Clinton campaign. Stone was contacted by senior Trump campaign officials to inquire about future releases by WikiLeaks. Prosecutors also allege a senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone about any additional releases. It's unclear who delivered those instructions and which officials Stone was in touch with about WikiLeaks. At least one of them was Steve Bannon, the former White House chief strategist and chief executive of the Trump campaign. But Stone was not charged with conspiracy. He faces 1 count of obstruction and 5 counts of making false statements, both related to his alleged lies before the House Intelligence Committee.
Any error I made in my testimony would be both immaterial and without intent.
He also faces 1 count of trying to tamper with testimony from New York radio host Randy Credico, at one point even threatening to steal Credico's dog. Stone has claimed Credico was his back channel to WikiLeaks, which Credico denies. According to the indictment, Stone told Credico, "Stonewall it, plead the fifth, anything to save the plan," amid references to Richard Nixon and a character in the Godfather movies.
I never knew no Godfather.
A longtime political operative, Stone encouraged Trump to run for president and served as an advisor in the early months of Trump's presidential campaign. As the White House made this claim,
"This has nothing to do with the president and certainly nothing to do with the White House."
Today, Stone doubled down on his loyalty pledge.
There is no circumstance whatsoever under which I will bear false witness against the president.
Now, in a court filing, the special counsel's office is giving us an indication of why this indictment was originally handed down under seal and also why they probably used such heavy-handed tactics in picking up Roger Stone this morning. It says they wanted this indictment under seal because they were concerned that Roger Stone may decide to flee or to destroy evidence. Now, Roger Stone has been under scrutiny for the better part of 2 years, so it's interesting if he decided to destroy evidence just last night. At any rate, he'll be appearing in D.C. in court on Tuesday for his arraignment, Jake.
All right, and Sarah Murray joins the panel of experts here. And Sarah, I just want to clarify something because there seems like a very important part of this on page 4.12. After the WikiLeaks release of stolen DNC emails, a senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone about any additional releases and what other damaging information WikiLeaks had on Hillary Clinton. Do we have any idea who the senior Trump official was that directed a different senior Trump campaign official? Because presumably you can only be directed if you were also senior.
Right. We don't know the answer to that. I mean, we know that Steve Bannon was one of the people that Roger Stone was in touch with in the Trump campaign, but that's basically all we know. And that tells you that there were multiple senior campaign officials who were involved in this conversation about trying to get this information they believed Roger Stone had about WikiLeaks. I think the obvious question is, was this then candidate Trump who was making this direction? We don't have an answer to that question yet, Jim.
Yeah, and this was July 22nd. Bannon hadn't joined the campaign yet,
yeah.
So this would be when Manafort
this would have been
was in the campaign.
A senior Trump campaign official who contacted Stone, and then another senior Trump campaign official who made that direction.
Who made the direction, yeah. And it's important whether it was Manafort telling Rick Gates to do it or whether somebody else was telling Manafort to do it. Kim Whaley, let me bring you in. Because the Trump campaign's all over this, despite what Sarah Sanders says. I mean, the president is not referenced, but the Trump campaign is all over it. Is this conspiracy? Is this quote-unquote collusion?
Well, collusion is a non-legal term. Conspiracy is a legal term.
Right.
I think the point was made that the charging it does not include conspiracy here. That requires a meeting of the minds in addition to a step towards some kind of crime. But here we do have, as you mentioned, throughout this indictment, references to Trump and the campaign and Mr. Stone being the intermediary, basically communicating in a really brazen way about these leaks of damaging information from the Clinton campaign. And I think what people need to keep in mind here is why this matters. This matters because it could have affected the actual outcome of the election. Our democratic process could have been distorted by virtue of these leaks and the stolen emails, which is also a crime.
Of course, President Trump mentioned WikiLeaks all the time. I want to get your take on something, Jen Psaki, because you used to speak from the podium on behalf of the Obama campaign. Take a listen to this exchange between John Berman on CNN's New Day and Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, trying to get to the bottom of whether or not President Trump was the one who directed anybody to talk to Stone.
Did the president direct someone to contact Roger Stone about stolen emails?
Look, John, I'm not an attorney. I haven't read through that. Even if I had, I'm not going to be able to provide you some type of insider legal analysis. What I can tell you is that the specific charges that have been brought against Mr. Stone don't have anything to do with the president.
Well, do you know whether that individual was the president?
Look, I know that the charges are about whether or not he gave false statements.
Did the president know or not? Was it the president who made that direction or not?
Once again, I haven't read this document.
Okay.
I mean, it would seem like before the interview you would settle as to whether or not the president was the one that directed the senior campaign official to reach out to Roger Stone.
Since that would be the most obvious question you would be asked. I mean, watching that one, it's very painful to watch, even though I'm not a Trump supporter, obviously. That would have been what you would have prepped. You could have decided you were going to cancel the interview. You could have been criticized for that. But what she did there is she made it seem like maybe he did know, maybe he was the person who directed it. And that actually did more damage than it did clean anything up. And that's never where you want to be as the spokesperson after an interview.
And presumably you would have read the indictment before coming on the...
Presumably you would have read the indictment, certainly before coming out to do an interview, but you also would have decided whether it was a wise thing to do an interview at all.
I want you to take a listen to what Roger Stone had to say today, Bill.
There is no circumstance whatsoever under which I will bear false witness against the president. I am one of his oldest friends. I am a fervent supporter of the president. I think he is doing a great job of making America great again.
There's nothing in this indictment that suggests that President Trump talked to Roger Stone at all. But there is stuff about people on the campaign. So he doesn't have to testify against President Trump.
Right. It's interesting that that occurred to him that he might have to, which does raise the question of whether it wasn't the president who directed the senior official to deal with WikiLeaks, or that the president would have known about such a direction. I do want to say something. On the last panel, I said incorrectly that the Senate had voted in December to keep the government open through the whole fiscal year. It was just through February 8th.
Right.
So just to clarify that.
Thank you for the correction.
Yeah. But no, I think look, as of now, let me put it this way, because of what Sarah Sanders said, as of now, the White House has not denied, I believe, that the president might be the person at whose direction the senior campaign official dealt with WikiLeaks. That remains an open question. He could deny it now, or Sarah Sanders could deny it now. She could walk in and ask the president, and the president could say, no, it wasn't me, and then they could deny it. And I had no knowledge of it. But as of now, that has not been denied.
I think that we've been told that Manafort was not the one that reached out to Stone.
So we've gotten a lot of denials from a lot of people, but I'm running back through some of these denials in my head, and I know that Roger Stone has denied that he ever discussed WikiLeaks with Donald Trump, President Trump, candidate Trump. I also know that, Trump's folks, his legal team, have said that he never discussed WikiLeaks with Roger Stone. We haven't ever gotten the denial that there was a conversation through an intermediary, perhaps, about WikiLeaks. We still didn't get that denial today, obviously, from Sarah Sanders. But as I'm racking my brain for previous denials, I can't remember that one, ruling that out either.
Kim, as an experienced prosecutor, is Mueller's not done, do you think?
Oh, no. I think one thing that this demonstrates is that the notion that the whole thing will wrap up in the next month is kind of folly. I think there's a lot here, as was mentioned. We just see the tip of the iceberg. What's really interesting about this is there's a lot of documentary evidence, texts and emails from Mr. Stone in this indictment. I encourage people to actually read the actual indictment.
It's
but no, this is going to go on.
And also all the denials from Stone. Sarah, President Trump tweeted today, greatest witch hunt in the history of our country, no collusion, blah, 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 blah. Who alerted CNN to be there? That's a reference to the fact that CNN had this great exclusive video this morning. To be clear, CNN was not alerted to be there. It was through reporting that there was a hunch. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, we did have a hunch. We heard that the grand jury was going to be meeting on Thursday, and that struck us as unusual. And they did, actually. They heard testimony from Jerome Corsi's stepson on Thursday, and we heard through our sources that there was a reason that it was scheduled for Thursday. There was some suggestion that they might be busy. Mueller's team might be busy on Friday. And, you know, we have a couple of our eagle-eyed reporters who spotted one of the prosecutors who has been working on this Roger Stone case leave the office with a suitcase. And
suitcase. Where are you going?
You know, it just didn't seem like the right time for a prosecutor on the Roger Stone case to be taking a fun weekend away. And so we decided that out of an abundance of caution, you know, we should stake out Roger Stone's home just in case something did happen. And Stone and his attorney, I think, were very convinced that he would have an opportunity to turn himself in, that they would not get this kind of treatment from the FBI. But we, you know, followed what was unusual court activity, unusual prosecutor activity.
Yeah.
And it was Roger Stone Day.
Great reporting, great hunches. I'm glad it all worked out. Thanks, everyone. Stick around. Stone has been called the cockroach of American politics. He was even fired once from the Dole campaign because of a sleazy swinger ad. Take a look at Roger Stone's sordid and downright shady past next.